The grand loading hall stretched 50 feet high with industrial lattice ceiling and soft overhead blue work lights that hummed steadily. Metal catwalks bridged upper levels, and rows of cargo containers stood 6 feet tall in organized rows. Loading equipment scattered across the polished floor, and the space echoed with the sounds of work. Oberon watched Katriona scan items on a manifest with her handheld device, while Mirith explained cargo specifications in that low, humming voice that made Oberon's teeth itch. Oberon kept gesturing with his hands even though nobody asked him to. His charcoal cargo pants had pockets stuffed with random items, and his white technical shirt was already wrinkled despite the early hour. The safety vest hung unbuttoned from his shoulders, and his scuffed boots clicked against the floor as he moved with that confident stride that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. Everything about him suggested he belonged here. He did not belong here. Katrina bent over her cargo, manifest with the focused intensity of someone who had forgotten the rest of the station existed. Her red hair remained tight in its bun, and her green eyes tracked every number on the clipboard. The Navy tactical jumpsuit showed tool marks on her forearms, and her fingerless work gloves were worn from constant use. She made a note and moved to the next item without looking up. Meth stood beside them in the flowing silver ceremonial robe that shimmered faintly under the blue work lights. The pale translucent skin seemed almost translucent under the illumination, and the bioluminescent rim of the mushroom cap crown glowed steady amber. The two dark oval eyes looked between Oberon and Katriona as the spore vents on both shoulders remained closed. The low hum of Marith's voice continued, explaining import protocols, and Oberon nodded as if he understood anything being said. The far doors to the loading hall opened. Every sound stopped. The hum of the equipment cut out. The clicking of Katriona's handheld device ceased. Oberon's gesturing hands froze mid-motion. Meth's speaking voice dropped to absolute silence. The soft blue work lights flickered once and stabilized. Workers throughout the hall halted whatever they held and turned toward the entrance. Drivak stepped through the doors. The arachnid-based creature stood 5'8" in tall, with dark gray-brown chitinous surface covering every inch of his frame. The flat, angular face had two glossy dark eyes arranged horizontally, and the Chelizeri jaw plates framed his small central mouth. Fine directional sensory hairs covered his entire body, and they rippled slightly as he moved with predatory precision down the center of the hall. He wore a black tactical bodysuit form fitted to his frame with reinforced padding along shoulders and spine. Sleek gray armor plates covered his forearms and shins and clicked audibly with each step. His two long, thin, sharp-edged fingers extended from fingerless gloves, and his high collar supported the sensory hair array without obstruction. Drivak did not acknowledge the stares. He moved between the cargo containers like someone who had walked this hall 100 times. His identification badge, reading Weapons Inspector Threat Assessment Division, caught the blue light and glinted for a moment before disappearing into his inner chest pocket. Oberon watched this and thought nothing. His mind moved slowly and usually in the wrong direction. He assumed this was some routine inspection he had forgotten to log. Katrina did not look up from her manifest. She continued scanning items with her handheld device and made another note on the clipboard. Her focus had not broken for a single moment. The silence stretched for 10 full seconds, then 15, then 20. Reth's bioluminescent cap began to flicker. The steady amber glow shifted to orange and then to a pale yellow that made the trade diplomat look increasingly uneasy. The spore vents on both shoulders seemed to quiver, as if considering activation. Mirith said nothing. The low humming had stopped completely. Oberon glanced at Katriona. She was still working, absolutely still working. He looked at me. The cap continued flickering. He looked at the doors through which Drivak had entered. The weapons inspector had disappeared into the command center stairwell that led upward toward the observation deck. The blue work lights brightened as if someone had released a breath they did not know they held. Activity resumed in the hall. Workers returned to their tasks with visible relief. Equipment hummed back to life. The clicking of Katrina's handheld device resumed its steady rhythm. Marith's low voice started again, but the words sounded different now. They sounded careful. Oberon thought he should say something. His confidence suggested he should make a joke or a comment that would dispel the tension. Instead, he found himself watching Dravak's path toward the command center. Something about the way the sensory hairs had rippled bothered him. Something about the precision of each footstep seemed wrong. Oberon had no training in threat assessment and no understanding of arachnid body language, but his instincts, which were rarely correct, seemed to be screaming at him. Then he forgot about it entirely because Katrina spoke without looking up. She said, and tilted the manifest toward the light. This weight doesn't match the spec. What weight? Oberon asked. The container from Sector 7? Katrina said and made a note with her pen. It's 2 kilos light. Could be a measurement error or actual shortage. Either way, it's logged. She turned the page and continued scanning the next item with the same singularity of focus she brought to everything. The dangerous situation that existed seconds ago seemed to have evaporated from her awareness entirely. Oberon realized with growing horror that she had not even noticed Dravak's entrance. She had not paused her work. She had not looked up from her manifest. Katriona, did you notice that thing that just walked in? Oberon said. The container? Katriona said without looking up. Yeah, I saw it come in. It's the weight discrepancy I mentioned. No, the gray creature with all the legs. It has 2 legs and 2 arms like everything else. Katrina said, You're thinking about it wrong. Anyway. This manifest has 4 items flagged for recount, and the import protocol requires verification before we can clear them for storage. Do you want to help or continue asking me about workers? Oberon opened his mouth to explain that the creature was definitely a weapons inspector, and that the way he moved seemed less like an inspection and more like a hunt. But Katriona was already moving to the next cargo container with her handheld device. Her orange safety glasses were pushed up on her head and her focus was absolute. She did not care about Dravak. She did not care about the silence. She did not care about anything except the cargo manifest in her hands. Smeth's bioluminescent cap continued to flicker between orange and yellow. The trade diplomat's 2 dark oval eyes tracked Oberon with what might have been sympathy or might have been resignation. The spore vents remained closed, but the pale translucent skin seemed to ripple with stress. Perhaps we should pause the manifest verification, Mirith said in that low humming voice. Perhaps there are other tasks that require attention at this moment. No, Katriona said. The containers need to be cleared and the count needs to be accurate. We can do it in 2 hours if we focus. Oberon walked toward the nearest container and immediately caught his foot on a cable that ran across the floor. He stumbled forward, and his right hand shot out to grab something stable. His palm landed on a control panel mounted on the side of the container, and 3 of his fingers pressed buttons at random. The panel beeped once, and then the container's loading mechanism activated with a sharp mechanical sound that echoed through the entire hall. Katrina did not look up from her manifest. Did you just activate the loader? She asked. I fell, Oberon said. I caught myself. Did you press the buttons? My hand was falling. Katrina turned toward the container. The loader was beginning to extend, and it made a grinding sound that suggested something was wrong. Oberon's foot had also disconnected a secondary cable when he fell, and now the loader moved at an angle that no loader should move at. The grinding increased in pitch. Turn it off, Katrina said. Oberon ran back to the panel and pressed every button he could find. The loader accelerated instead of stopping. It extended further and tilted more sharply, and the grinding noise became a screaming metallic sound that made Marth's bioluminescent cap flare bright red. The trade diplomat backed away from the container with both arms extended defensively. Turn it off, Katrina repeated, but she was already moving toward the panel herself. She did not run. She walked with purpose. Her fingerless work gloves were already being pulled tight on her hands. The orange safety glasses dropped from her head onto her eyes in a single smooth motion. Oberon continued pressing buttons. None of them did anything. The loader was now extended almost fully and tilted at an angle of nearly 45 degrees. It was pointing upward and outward and directly toward one of the metal catwalks that bridged the upper level. Katrina reached the control panel and pushed Oberon aside with her shoulder. She examined the buttons for exactly 1 second and then pressed 3 in a specific sequence. The loader did not stop. If anything, it moved faster. She pressed them again. Still nothing. You disconnected the primary safety cable when you fell, she said to Oberon without any particular blame in her voice. The loader is now running on emergency activation mode, which cannot be interrupted except by emergency shutdown. Where is the emergency shutdown? Oberon asked, on the upper catwalk. Katrina said, mounted on the eastern support column where it should be easy to access in an actual emergency, the loader continued extending and tilting. It was now almost horizontal and pointing directly at the upper catwalk, where the emergency shutdown button waited uselessly. The grinding sound had become a high-pitched squeal that hurt to hear. Meth's bioluminescent cap flashed between red and white, and the spore vents on both shoulders burst open in panic. A thick cloud of faintly green spores exploded outward and drifted down through the blue work lights like strange snow. The trade diplomat made a sound that might have been distress in fungal language, or might have been resignation to inevitable disaster. Oberon looked at Katriona. Katriona looked at the loader. The loader continued its trajectory toward absolute catastrophe. "We need to get to that button," Oberon said. "Yes," Katriona agreed. She turned and ran toward the nearest access ladder that led to the upper catwalk. Oberon followed behind her, still wearing his unbuttoned safety vest and scuffed boots. The loader squealed on behind them, and the sound echoed off every metal surface in the hall. More workers stopped their tasks and stared at the extending loader that was now pointed directly at the catwalk, like a weapon. Katriona reached the ladder first and began climbing with the speed of someone who had done this 100 times. Her fingers gripped metal rungs, and her feet found purchase with mechanical efficiency. Oberon reached the ladder 3 seconds later and grabbed it with both hands. He was not a naturally gifted climber. His foot found the first rung correctly, but his second foot missed, and he hung there for a moment by his arms before he managed to find the step. The loader continued extending. Katriona pulled herself onto the upper catwalk and began running toward the eastern support column, where the emergency shutdown button mounted in its bright red housing. The catwalk shook slightly under her feet as she moved with purpose. Her red hair had escaped slightly from its bun and bounced behind her, but she did not slow. Oberon reached the catwalk, 3 rungs behind, and immediately caught his foot on something, because of course he did. He fell forward and his hands caught the metal railing. He hung suspended for a moment and then pulled himself up and forward. Katriona was almost to the emergency button. The loader arm extended fully. It did not stop. It bent at an angle that metal should not bend, and the entire mechanism screamed in agony. The far end of the loader came directly down toward the catwalk, and Katrina's outstretched hand reached the emergency button with precision. She pressed it hard. Nothing happened. The button did not activate. The loader did not stop. Oberon realized with absolute clarity that the emergency shutdown had somehow failed, which made sense because he had disconnected the primary cable so thoroughly that probably secondary systems were also compromised. Katriona realized this at the exact same moment, and her expression did not change. She continued moving forward with the same singularity of purpose. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the catwalk, mounting with her right hand, and turned to face the incoming loader arm. "You have to be kidding," Oberon said. Katriona aimed the extinguisher at the base of the loader arm mechanism and began spraying the white chemical foam directly into the joint where the hydraulic system connected. The foam covered the joint and began to drip down in white streams. The loader arm's descent slowed. It slowed more. It stopped 3 feet above the catwalk, with a final grinding sound that suggested something had seized up internally, and probably permanently. Then silence returned to the grand loading hall. Katriona lowered the fire extinguisher and turned to look at Oberon. Her green eyes were still focused. Her grip on the extinguisher remained firm. She did not look panicked or relieved, or anything other than completely present in the moment. "We need to go back down and assess the damage to the primary cable," she said. "Yes, okay," Oberon replied. They descended the ladder in reverse order and reached the ground level where Marth stood with the bioluminescent cap still flickering red and orange. The spore vents had sealed shut, but the pale translucent skin still rippled with stress. The blue work lights illuminated everything in that steady hum that seemed somehow more ominous now. Oberon saw something in his peripheral vision that made him turn toward the command center stairwell. Drivak stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the immobilized loader and the suspended catwalk and the chaos below. The weapons inspector's 2 glossy dark eyes were fixed on Katriona. His sensory hairs were fully extended and rigid with attention. The Chelazar jaw plates clicked once slowly, as if processing something that did not fit into whatever threat assessment calculation he had been running. Then Vorai appeared behind Drivak and touched his shoulder with a webbed finger. The security inspector's echolocation chirped once in what might have been urgent communication. Drivak's head turned away from Katriona, and he descended the stairs with Vorai following behind. Katrina was already walking back toward her cargo manifest and the containers that still needed verification. We still have 4 items to recount, she said, without looking at the departing weapons inspector or the immobilized loader or the fire extinguisher foam dripping down the catwalk. If we focus, we can have them cleared before end of shift. Oberon followed her back to the first container. Emerith remained where he stood, with the bioluminescent cap slowly fading from red to orange to a troubled yellow. The trade diplomat looked at the chaos, and then at Katrina's focused figure, and then at the spiral of spore clouds that still drifted through the blue work lights. I do not understand human psychology, Meth said in that low, humming voice. Oberon did not respond, because he did not understand it either. The blue work lights hummed on, and the grand loading hall settled back into its rhythm, even though nothing had actually settled and nothing was actually okay. Katriona continued scanning her manifest. Oberon continued following her instructions, and somewhere in the command center above, Dravak was having a conversation with Vorai and Avos that Oberon could not hear but probably should have been more concerned about. Vorhiai's echolocation clicks accelerated as Dravak entered the command center observation deck. The security inspector's domed, melon-filled forehead pulsed with rapid scanning, and his webbed fingers gripped the edge of the control console with visible tension. Avos stood beside him in her white medical coat, and her gill frills flared bright crimson along both sides of her neck. The vivid warning color patches along her collarbone cycled through orange and red in synchronized panic. Dravak moved to the observation window that overlooked the grand loading hall below. His sensory hairs rippled across his entire gray-brown chitinous frame as he processed what he had just witnessed. The loader mechanism still hung suspended above the catwalk, and the fire extinguisher foam continued dripping in white streams. The human female was already returning to her cargo manifest, as if the entire catastrophe had been nothing more than a minor interruption. The contract parameters have become complicated, Dravak said, and his Kellizer jaw plates clicked slowly. The target demonstrates survival capability that exceeds standard human profile. She survived a mechanical failure, Vorai said, and his echolocation chirped in rising pitch. That was not combat capability. That was luck and access to fire suppression equipment. She did not survive, Dravak replied. She prevented the failure from reaching completion. She assessed the situation in real time and implemented a solution using available resources. That is tactical thinking. Ivos's gill frills fluttered and her warning patches flashed to bright yellow. The female did not stop her work during the entire incident. She did not acknowledge the severity of the situation. She continued scanning cargo manifest items while a loader mechanism was failing above her head. That is not tactical thinking. That is psychological dysfunction. Dravak's sensory hairs extended fully in attention. The 2 glossy dark eyes fixed on Avos with something that might have been recognition, or it is the most effective tactical approach. The human male panicked and created the problem. The human female did not panic and solve the problem. Her refusal to acknowledge emotional context allowed her to function without the cognitive burden of fear. She probably did not understand the danger. Vorai said, "That is irrelevant to the outcome," Dravak replied. In the grand loading hall below, Katriona had moved to the second container, requiring manifest verification. Her handheld device scanned items, and her orange safety glasses remained positioned on her eyes. Oberon stood beside her, holding a small data tablet that he did not know how to use. Meth's bioluminescent cap had returned to steady amber, and the spore vents remained sealed, although the faint green clouds still drifted through the blue work lights. Oberon gestured at something, and his hand caught a cable that ran along the base of the second container. The cable was connected to nothing important, but it was connected to something. And when Oberon's hand caught it, his arm jerked backward and his entire body twisted unexpectedly. His left shoulder collided with a metal support strut, and he made a sound of pain that echoed through the hall. Katriona continued scanning cargo without glancing at him. "Are you all right?" she asked without looking up. "I hit something," Oberon replied. "Do not hit the structural supports," Katriona said. "They are load-bearing. If you collapse the framework, you will damage the containers, and we will have to restart the entire count." Oberon rubbed his shoulder and stepped sideways away from the cable. His movement was clumsy, and his foot caught on a second cable that ran perpendicular to the first. This cable was actually connected to something important. It was connected to the pressure seals on container number 3. When Oberon's foot caught the cable and he stumbled forward, the entire container's pressure system engaged prematurely. The container hissed. Air pressure equalized with a sharp sound, and the container's doors swung open with force. Something inside shifted, and a small metallic object tumbled out onto the polished floor. It rolled past Oberon and came to rest near Cryona's feet. She looked at it. Then she looked at Oberon. "Did you open Container 3? She asked. "I fell on a cable," Oberon said. "Container 3 was sealed, pending full structural inspection. It was not supposed to open until verification was complete. I am sorry." "Do not be sorry." "Be more careful," Katrina said. She bent down and picked up the metallic object. It was roughly cylindrical and approximately the size of her fist. Strange markings covered its surface, and it felt warm despite being stored in a sealed container. Meth's bioluminescent cap flashed white. The trade diplomat made a sound that was definitely distress in fungal language. Both spore vents on both shoulders burst open simultaneously, and a thick cloud of green-tinged spores exploded outward in all directions. Meth backed away from the metallic object with both arms extended defensively. "What is that?" Katrina asked. "That is a fungal stabilization catalyst," Emrath said, and the low hum of his voice had become urgent. "That device is worth more than this entire station. That device was supposed to remain sealed until it reached our primary colony. If it has been exposed to atmospheric contamination, it is worthless." "It is warm," Cryona observed. "It should not be warm if it has been sealed in storage." Cryona turned the object over in her hands. The strange markings seemed to catch the blue worklights and glint faintly. She held it up to her orange safety glasses as if the lenses might reveal something additional about the device. Upstairs in the command center, Devak's sensory hairs stood fully rigid. "She is holding a fungal stabilization catalyst," Vorai said, and his echolocation clicks had become frantic. "That device is worth enough to purchase 3 small stations. If it is damaged, the entire trade agreement between the Fungal Coalition and Station Authority becomes null." "The container was sealed to specification," Avos said, and her gill frills fluttered with uncertainty. "The device should not have been warm. The environmental controls should have maintained stabilization." Drevak watched Katriona turn the device in her hands with that same singularity of focus she brought to everything. She was not thinking about its value. She was not thinking about trade agreements or fungal coalitions or anything except the device itself. Her mind was examining it the way a technician examines any object that behaves unexpectedly. "The container seals have failed," she said to Meth. "The pressure equalization indicates internal system collapse. The device is warm because the environmental controls stopped working. That means it has been unstabilized for an undetermined amount of time." Morth's bioluminescent cap cycled from white to red to orange to yellow. The spore vents continued, releasing clouds, and the pale translucent skin rippled with what had to be genuine distress. "It is lost," Meth said. "The device is unstabilized and therefore useless. The Fungal Coalition will consider this cargo loss as breach of contract." Cryona examined the device more carefully. The strange markings on its surface seemed to form patterns, and the warmth she felt against her palm seemed to pulse slightly. She turned it over again and studied the way the markings reflected light. "The device is still functional," she said. "It is warm because it is actively stabilizing itself. It is pulsing because it is using internal energy reserves to maintain stability. It has not failed. It has been compensating for system failure for however long since the container seals collapsed." Marith stopped backing away. "That is not possible." The trade diplomat said the device cannot self-stabilize beyond passive parameters. "Then your specification sheet is inaccurate," Cryona replied. "Or this device is an improved model that the specification sheet does not account for. Either way, it is functioning. Bring it with me." Katrina walked toward the command center stairs with the fungal stabilization catalyst still in her hands. Oberon followed behind her because that was what he generally did. Marth followed behind Oberon, still releasing spores, although with less panic and more uncertainty. Katrina reached the command center and climbed the stairs with the same methodical pace she applied to everything. Vorai saw her ascending, and his echolocation chirps intensified to panicked frequency. Avis's warning patches flashed through every color in rapid succession, and her gill frills flared so wide they seemed impossible. Dravak simply watched. Katrina entered the command center observation deck and placed the fungal stabilization catalyst on the control console. The device continued pulsing warmly, and the strange markings seemed to catch the emergency lighting in ways that should not have been physically possible. The container seal failed. Katrina said to me, the environmental control stopped functioning approximately 72 hours ago based on the power consumption signature in the maintenance logs. The device has been self-stabilizing throughout that period using internal energy reserves. She turned the device over one final time and pointed at a section of the markings that glowed faintly beneath her orange safety glasses. This section here indicates active self-rep protocols. This device is not just stabilizing itself, it is repairing itself, which means when the seals were compromised, the device activated emergency self-preservation mode. The exposure to atmospheric contamination probably triggered some kind of protective response. Meredith looked at the fungal stabilization catalyst. The bioluminescent cap slowly faded from yellow back to steady amber. The spore vents remained open, but released spores at a much slower rate. "You are suggesting the device is better now than it was," Meth said slowly. "I am suggesting the device is exactly what it was designed to be if your designers included emergency self-repair protocols, which apparently they did," Katrina replied. "It survived system failure and container breach and is currently in perfect working condition." She placed the device back in Moore's translucent, pale hands. The trade diplomat held it carefully, and the bioluminescent cap brightened to warm amber gold. Dravak watched this entire exchange from his position at the observation window. His sensory hairs gradually lowered from full extension to normal rippling. His Kaiser jaw plates clicked once slowly and then remained still. "The contract has been fulfilled," Dravak said, and his two glossy dark eyes fixed on Katriona. "The fungal stabilization catalyst has reached the station intact and in functional condition. The trade agreement remains valid." He turned away from the observation window and began walking toward the stairs. "You are leaving without completing the contract," Varai asked. "The contract is complete," Dravak replied. The target was not the human female. The contract was to deliver the fungal stabilization catalyst safely to station authority. The human female accomplished that task. Hunting her would be counterproductive to the primary objective. Dravak descended the stairs with his sensory hairs moving in slow rippling patterns. His gray-brown chitinous frame moved with that predatory precision. But there was something different about it now. Something almost like respect. Katriona did not watch him leave. She was already examining the environmental control system that had failed on Container 3. Her orange safety glasses caught the blue work lights, and her hands moved with practice efficiency as she pulled access panels and traced the failures through the technical architecture. "What is she doing?" Avos asked, and her gill frills had returned to normal coloration. "She is repairing the system that failed," Vorai said, and his echolocation had slowed to normal frequency. "She is ensuring that no other containers experience the same seal and environmental control failure. She is not thinking about the contract anymore," Avos observed. "No," Vorai agreed. "She has already moved on to the next problem that requires solving." In the grand loading hall 3 hours later, Katrina finished replacing the failed environmental control components on Container 3. Oberon handed her tools as requested and tried his best not to cause additional disasters. Meth's bioluminescent cap glowed steady green, and the spore vents remained closed. Katrina scanned the manifest one final time and made a notation on her clipboard. She pulled her orange safety glasses up onto her red hair and looked at Oberon. "We should report the container seal failure to maintenance and request inspection of all remaining containers." She said we should also request an updated specification sheet for the fungal stabilization catalyst, so we understand what self-repair protocols were activated. And then Oberon asked, "And then we continue with the manifest verification." Katriona replied there are still 4 containers remaining. She returned to her focused work without another word. Oberon followed behind. The blue work lights hummed their steady rhythm, and the grand loading hall settled back into its rhythm of organized chaos and human incompetence that somehow managed to accomplish impossible things. Upstairs, Dravak left through the command center exit with his sensory hairs slowly rippling. His contract had been completed. His target had accomplished the primary objective without ever knowing there was a contract to begin with. The human female had solved the problem, not through strength or training or understanding of what was at stake, but through sheer singularity of focus and refusal to stop working. It was the most dangerous thing Dravak had ever encountered. He filed his weapons inspector badge back into his inner chest pocket and descended toward the loading bay exit. Somewhere in the station, Emrath was reviewing specifications and Vorai was filing incident reports, and Avos was shaking her head at human survival methods that defied logical explanation. Katrina continued her cargo manifest verification without knowing that a contract killer had walked into her hall. She never looked up. She never acknowledged the danger. She simply completed her work with the same mechanical precision she brought to everything. And that was why humans were the most superior species in this sector of space. Not because they were strong or intelligent or trained or tactically aware, but because they would simply keep working no matter what fell around.